Hi there, salve. Welcome to Interview Insights, organized by the US-Italy Forum. I'm Claudia Flisi, a journalist in Washington, D.C., and a graduate of SCIAS, the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, which hosts the forum. Today's conversation is with Giuseppe Caltabiano, Vice President of Marketing for Rock Content, a firm that creates content experiences for clients worldwide. Dr. Caltabiano was educated at Bocconi and at London Business School, and he's a sought-after speaker, teacher, and thought leader in marketing and also in AI, which is the flavor du jour of this period. Welcome, Dr. Caltabiano. Welcome to the forum.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor to be here.
Let's start off with your expertise. You have more than 20 years experience as a marketing, brand, and content executive. But for those unfamiliar with, let's say, the latter two terms, can you sort of explain what they mean very synthetically?
Absolutely, yes. Now, marketing, branding, and content are essential pieces of any business, and I will break them down in the simplest way possible. Marketing is the process of attracting and retaining customers. It's about making people aware about your product or service and highlighting the value. Marketing works in two ways, can be short-term and long-term. The long-term of it is basically called brand building, and it's generating demand. The short-term is about capturing that demand. Branding is about making the brand memorable, so the company brand memorable. Quoting Professor Jenny Romaniuk, which is the author of a beautiful book, Building Distinctive Brand Assets. What she says is, branding is a measure of how many people exposed to your marketing activities can remember and name the brand being advertised. And finally, we have content, which is basically the smallest piece of information. It's information, experiences that we usually share through different media. Can be anything from blog posts, videos, social media posts, updates, printed assets, of course. I mean, the traditional way of generating content, brochures, and so on and so forth. Good content helps telling your story and engage your audience. So, in summary, marketing is critical, is a critical element of your company and brand growth. Branding shapes customer perception about your brand and ensure that your company brand will be memorable. And content is basically a vehicle to deliver your message.
Okay. Which means there's also an overlap with propaganda, the political side of communication. Yes?
There may be. It really depends on the context.
Right. You've lived and worked in Italy, the US, and the UK,
Yes.
Maybe others, but those are the three I picked up. And your company is headquartered in Brazil, and it has offices in the US and Mexico. And you yourself are based in the UK. So are there global standards for what you've just described, or does marketing, especially online marketing, which is your expertise, does that change country by country?
Well, first of all, yeah, you're right. I consider myself a global marketer. Marketing is both an art and a science at the same time. And there is a foundation. And while foundation and principle of marketing remain consistent, of course, it went through a big evolution. And there may be some differences country by country. So let's say that there are both universal marketing principles and regional variations. The core principles are basically those like marketing laws, the importance of understanding your audience. First of all, this is really critical. Maintaining a strong brand identity, which has to be consistent worldwide. However, I mean, we can deny that there are cultural differences, local regulations, consumers may have different preferences, and this means that marketing strategies often need to be tailored to specific markets. I remember when I consulted a consumer company that was basically introducing a new mobile phone in Asia and Europe. Well, marketing principles were the same, and the launch was orchestrated at the same time, but the audience was completely different. Much older in Europe, so basically my age, we are the one who usually take buying decisions. In Asia, it was much younger. And for this reason, the channels they've been using to get in touch with the potential customers were completely different. New social media channels for the Asian guys, while more traditional channels, traditional media in Europe. So yeah, this is, we marketers need to play with both a global approach and at the same time a local approach. If we consider the countries where I've been living and where I actually live, so Italy, UK, and the United States, just to give an example, in Italy the focus is still on personal connection and very emotive storytelling. That's what we Italians like a lot. In the United States, it's all about innovation. It's very data driven. It's personalized. I mean, the communication is personalized, driven by early adoption, new technologies, digital dominance. That's really the US market. It's always the first, moving on with the new adoption of technology. In the UK, what I see is a lot of attention about transparency, quality content, regulatory compliances. These are the elements that usually take center stage. So in summary, and this is of course based on my experience, I see that across different countries, there is a huge importance of balancing global and local elements to create some kind of effective marketing strategies that resonate with the different audiences.
Right, which obviously makes sense. And another question for which the answer I'm sure is going to be obvious as well. Your background includes both very large enterprises, especially in the US, but also there are some in Italy, and certainly there are quite a few in the UK, and startups, of which there are many everywhere. How do you accommodate online marketing to the nuances of differences among these two groups of customers of yours?
Yeah, I've been working, you're right, for many years in large enterprises, then in the last 7 years in startups, mostly in the technology sector, mostly in B2B. I've been doing some B2C, but I'm mostly a B2B guy now, which is business to business, of course. I think there are some big differences and some commonalities. The differences are, well, budget, first of all, clearly different. Startups need to focus and prioritize. They don't have a large amount of money like it is available usually for large enterprises. Team size, resources, of course, tend to be very different. But on the other side, agility is also different. Small companies are much more agile and typically faster than large enterprises. And these are the differences. But there are some commonalities, and the commonalities are usually based on common marketing principles. So strategy is a must. Both companies, large enterprises and small startups, they must have a long-term strategy. An audience-centric approach. So whenever they start with marketing, before doing anything, understand the proper understanding of the audience and what the audience is consuming in terms of content and how they can be eventually influenced by content. This is a must. There are many other things, like storytelling. This works across the board for both large enterprises, for small enterprises. Quality over quantity. That's another thing that I usually try to teach to the companies where I work with, and maybe, which is a recent one, data-driven insight. So today with online activities, it's much easier to better understand consumer behavior. Data is available immediately, with online activities, with online channels. So this is definitely a common ground between startups and large enterprises. So yeah, even in this case, I would say it's a combination. It's a balance between different approaches, different realities, different budget on one side, and on the other side, still common marketing principles, which are definitely not changing, moving from a large enterprise to a small startup.
Or from one country to another.
Or from one country to another, exactly, yes.
Right. You mentioned storytelling. You have a blog, very good blog, called Marketing Across Borders, which has a category devoted to storytelling. And you've discussed in that blog and elsewhere a strategic storytelling and business, not children's storytelling, but business storytelling.
Yes.
Could you elaborate your main takeaways on that?
Absolutely. And this is probably the very last addition to my competencies. The interesting point is I've been studying storytelling using Hollywood screenwriters' books, not business book, because I think learning how to develop a story is a critical point of telling a company strategy. And the best way is to learn from who really knows how to tell a story, which is, again, Hollywood screenwriters. Now, the point with storytelling is very simple. We humans love stories because they build memory structures. So it's much easier to remember a story than numbers and fact. I like to mention an individual, Ben Horowitz, which is a venture capital founder from the United States. And what he's used to say is the story is the strategy. If you make a story better, you make the strategy better. So in few words, story strategy, which doesn't mean that telling a story, you are telling a strategy. It's the way you vehicle the strategy using storytelling principles that is basically compelling and engaging for people. And that's the reason why I talk about business narrative or strategic narrative and not just narrative. It's basically applying storytelling principle to the company story. And this is very different from telling a company chronology. It's not the company history, it's the company story. So how to, it's again, using storytelling principles to explain the values that a brand is basically bringing to the consumers. It's also a biological fact. When we receive information as a story, rather than simple facts, our brain activity increase fivefold. The parts of the brain that are responsible for emotional reaction start immediately to kick in. And you can see this when you watch a movie or a series, when you read a book, when someone tells you a story. We really start to care about the story main characters. And the reason is, again, a biological reason. It's our brain is starting to produce oxytocin, which is a chemical hormone that is basically creating empathy. And this means that we feel very connected with the hero or the heroes in the story. There are additional things happening in our brain. New research are indicating that our brains produce the stress hormone cortisol during the very tense moment in a story, which basically give us the possibility to focus and to pay additional attention in that specific moments. And finally, whenever something good happens in a story, like happy ending, well, in that case, our brain basically reward ourselves releasing dopamine, which is like the optimistic hormone. So these are all things happening in our brain. Of course, we don't realize that, but this is helping us to remember those stories instead of simple fact. Now, at this point, you understand the reason why it's so important for marketing, because branding is about remembering the brand. If you can tell the brand values using storytelling, well, you are basically facilitating people to remember your brand. They will associate a story, an emotional story, to your brand, and they will remember that brand because of the story. And this is extremely visible whenever we see beautiful TV commercials, for example, which bring a lot of emotions. And maybe the brand is just at the end, because their main focus is not selling products. It is not a short-term approach. It's really building those memory structures that will basically stay resident in our memory whenever we will go through buying decisions. At that point, we will recall that brand just because of the story. So that's the reason why storytelling is so important. It's basically because it is helping and facilitating those memory structure creation. And as a consequence, it supports branding.
It's not surprising that another part of your blog has a category devoted to psychology.
That's true.
And I know from having looked at the blog that you are a good student of psychology and maybe more than that. But how do marketers and advertisers and in these days influencers who lack your sophisticated understanding of psychology, how can they break through? Because not everyone is as knowledgeable or well-read as you are and articulate about the dynamics of psychology.
Well, first of all, I think you are too kind. I'm not a psychologist, but I've been studying psychology in terms of customer behavior, consumer behavior. So everything has been, again, focused on what I do every single day. I think in general, while having a sophisticated understanding of psychology can provide a significant edge, at the same time, marketers who may lack this expertise can still be successful by focusing on several key basic principles. And one of these is the new studies, basically, in the last decade that have been, in a way, reshaping the way we understand consumer behavior. In the past, we always thought, we marketers, as a science, we always thought that our brain was a very rational information processing machine. But recently, this theory has been replaced by empirical research that showed that human decisions are often very irrational and driven primarily by emotion. And we go back to the emotion side. So emotions are the main drivers of behavior. And this is important to understand for marketers, for people in business, because while in the past, marketing was considered a way to act on consumer at rational level, maybe trying to persuade them to buy something. Well, today, the modern approach is completely different. The objective of marketing is considered to act at an emotional level. Marketing campaigns have to leverage emotions and produce long-lasting memories. So even this kind of basic understanding of how our brain is generating those memory structures we mentioned during the conversation about storytelling, well, this is enough to understand that you no longer need to persuade customers. That's not the way we work, our brain work. We need to be emotionally involved. And at that point, we will remember the brand. And whenever we will be in front of a buying decision, well, we may remember that brand and buy that specific brand. There are other basic principles of psychology. And one of them, which I really love, is Cialdini's principles of persuasion. Dr. Robert Cialdini, which I think is pretty famous all over the world, but mostly in the United States, he's talking about 6 principles of persuasion: reciprocity, commitment, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity. And it is interesting for us marketers to understand how powerful as these tools, these shortcuts, and how to use them whenever we do our job. Those principles basically help in crafting messages. I mean, let's go with an example. We always use social proof by showcasing testimonials or customers that are already buying from us. Whenever we register to a new newsletter, usually the copy that we find on top of the newsletter registration is join, I don't know, 200,000 professionals that are acting like you. Well, the reality is we don't know if there are already 200,000 professionals that are basically, receiving the newsletter. But what happens in our brain is, well, if these guys, which are like me, are already reading the newsletter, why not? I mean, this is something that may help me in my job. So these are the shortcuts, and we are very lazy. Our brain is usually lazy and goes using those shortcuts. Scarcity is another important one. Think about when you travel and you need to buy a flight. You go and look for the best price, and then you discover that there are only 2 seats left. That's scarcity. Is it right? I mean, do they really have only 2 seats left? Probably not. But that, start to work, that's the way our brains start to work. And then we immediately think, well, if I don't buy this today, well, I will probably miss my flight, my opportunity, right, to fly at very cheap cost. And that's basically what happens. So again, in summary, you don't need to be a psychologist, but understanding, I think, very basic principles like Cialdini's persuasion principles, or eventually how the emotions work, it's absolutely extreme. It's very powerful. Not for us marketers, but for anyone who is in business and who has any kind of client, facing approach.
Question, applying these principles, which are applied all the time to political advertising, political positioning. There are British elections coming up next month on the 4th of July. I don't know why they chose the 4th of July. For Americans, it's kind of strange, but what marketing strategies do you see being used by the left and the right in the UK? It's presumed, but perhaps not completely correctly, that the left, which has not been in power for a long time, is going to sweep in. But I don't know what the marketing strategies look like on the ground, and you do. Can you tell us about that?
Well, that's a very good question, and you're right. We can probably apply some of the principles to politics and elections. First of all, I'm not, of course, I'm not a politician. That's not part of my field. But I live in Europe anyway. Well, actually, I live in the UK, which is
not part of
Europe, politically,
they say.
not Europe, but still geographically, it's part of Europe. I'm Italian, so I'm still an Italian citizen. So I'm observing what happens, and what I think is, well, first of all, you're right. There are some critical differences between the election here in the UK and the one that just happened, for example, at European level.
Yes.
And this is about the effectiveness, actually the lack of effectiveness at a certain point of the Conservative Party marketing strategy, because, I mean, after 14 years in power, well, this effectiveness is absolutely decreasing. Voters may desire to change purely for the sake of it, believing that a new government may bring fresh ideas and solutions. So the psychological barrier can be challenging to overcome. And also we know, especially people who are living here in the UK like me, that the long tenure of the Conservative Party has also been marked by different controversies in the past. How did they handle COVID, economic challenges? Of course, not everything is up to them, right? But still, 14 years in power, you associate all these failures to the party that is in power. So how they are using, back to your question, how they are using marketing? Well, the center-right, the Tories, are probably going with a more traditional approach. They continue to leverage traditional media, TV, radio, of course, in addition to social media. Newspapers have seen a lot, especially on the right side, to reach a broad audience. So high-profile media, advertisement, they are trying to reinforce their message of stability and experience using such kind of traditional media. Still, they're using social. They have a very, I think, properly working data-driven targeting. On the other side, Labour, so the center-left, is using more social media, and they're basing most of the activities on social media engagement. It's heavily leveraging social media platforms. They're trying to talk to young people, Twitter, TikTok, even Facebook, Instagram, yeah, especially to engage with the younger voters and the grassroots supporters. So they are using those platforms to share policies, to share live updates. I mean, this is, by the way, not just about the UK. I've seen a similar approach in Europe a couple of weeks ago. Yesterday, I was reading The Guardian, and it seems that the far right in Central Europe have been using extensively TikTok to get in touch with young generation, which is the reason why, especially in some countries like Germany and France, many of the young voters have switched from a more moderate approach to center-right. And we have seen what is happening in Europe today. So,
Yes.
so these are basically the differences, I would say. Center right going with a more traditional media approach, center left, Labor going with a more digital and kind of engagement. At the same time, again, we need to remember that those 14 years in power of one of the two parties is probably changing the vote anyway, regardless, their approach. So voters are really strongly oriented to the center left, also because of that reason. And this is, of course, making things completely different, from the other elections we just had in the rest of Europe.
Right. Okay. We are actually out of time, but one last very quick question with very quick answer. In your blog, you've discussed the use of AI, and of course, AI is the topic of the day and the month and probably this year. And I know it's being used by everyone, including journalists. How is AI, very briefly, changing your work, both for the better and for the worse? And to echo a marketing slogan of a movie in 1986, which you may have read about because you're studying movie scripts, should we be afraid? Should we be very afraid?
We should not be afraid. It's a very powerful tool that, if it's used wisely, can really enhance our superpower. Our superpower. My power is doing marketing. Writer's power is writing and copywriting. So I suggest all marketers and non-marketers to start to get familiar with AI. It's also pretty easy to approach. I mean, there are tools everywhere, Gemini, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Perplexity. It's very affordable. At the same time, it can be denied that the influence of AI on labor and workforce can be disrupting. And we have seen this. I've been working in content since ever. And in the last 18 months, because of AI, we have seen a 20% of decline in orders for writers. So this is a danger. But at the same time, I think we need to approach AI from the right side of it, which means it really empower us with everything that is analysis. Anything repetitive can be easily done by AI. And then the creative side will be our strength. So we need to try to split the two things. Creativity is us, but the power that AI can give you is you can finally focus on what you are really powerful. That's really the point for me. So in my opinion, we should not be afraid. At the same time, we need to use it wisely.
Right. Well, we'll probably have to have another conversation next year as AI evolves and we try to.
Yeah, it's evolving every single day. So yes.
But in the meantime, thank you very, very much for your time. And we'll check in again maybe after the US election and see if your marketing principles have applied there as well. Grazie tanto.
Grazie. Thank you very much for having me.